What's up y'all, Jmaculate here. In today's video, I'll be going over modulation on the Lofi-12 XT. By enabling this feature, you can link the control of certain parameters to a low frequency oscillator. This allows you to automate things like changes in pitch, volume, and other parameters over time. There's a lot to go over, so let's get to it. You can access the mod page by selecting the mod button. This will bring you to the mod page for the track you currently have selected. Each track has its own mod settings, which can control modulation of parameters specific to that track. By default, you're controlling LFO1, but if you select the auxiliary left button, you can change to LFO2. Let's review the controls, which operate the same regardless of the LFO you have selected. We'll start with the C knob. This knob lets you select one of 19 wave shape types to use as the oscillator. There are the garden variety shapes like sine, triangle, etc., and also a few other unique shapes like pulse, step, and random. The D knob has two functions. The first you activate by pressing the knob down, which allows you to select the target of the modulation. Or in other words, what parameter will be changed by the wave shape type according to the selections you made previously. There are a lot of options here, so in the second half of this video, I'll go over some use cases to help conceptualize what you can do with these. And the second function is available once you select a target. With a target set, you can turn the D knob to adjust the value of the parameter you selected. This would be the same as adjusting that parameter from whatever page it calls home. Here's an example where I set the target to amp level, and now I can change the level using the D knob on the mod page instead of needing to jump back to the amp page to change the level there. Keep in mind that if you change the value here, it will also be changed in its respective page. The B knob controls depth. This is the maximum distance that the parameter will travel from the value you set. As you increase this value, you'll see the wave display grow larger, and the oscillator causes the parameter to travel a greater distance before cycling. Keeping this low shrinks the wave, and the parameter only travels slightly with each cycle. The A knob controls rate, or how quickly the oscillator cycles. A higher number here means more frequent cycles, and a lower number means slower cycles. Then there's the details page, which has additional controls. You can access this by pressing the auxiliary right button. Here are what the controls do on this page. The A knob controls BPM sync. This can link your LFO's rate to the tempo of your pattern. When you have this set, the A knob of the previous page has a slightly different function. It will instead control the scaling of the rate. Basically, this allows you to adjust the rate so that it scales off the tempo. The B knob controls trig mode. With this enabled, the modulation will fade in instead of starting right when you press the pad. The higher this value, the longer it takes to fade in. Keeping this at 0 means that the modulation will trigger from the start of the cycle when you press a note. The C knob controls the phase of the LFO, or where the modulation starts in relation to the wave shape type you've selected. 0 is starting at the beginning, 180 is starting halfway through the cycle, and 359 is starting at the end of the cycle. And the D knob controls the count, or how many times the oscillator will cycle before returning to unmodulated playback. So now that we've gone over the basic controls, you might be wondering, how can I use this for my music? Well, there are 20 destinations and 2 LFOs per track, so there are a ton of ways that you can automate and modulate certain parameters to get different sounds that you want in your music. Let's go through a few use cases to give you an idea of the capabilities. Use case number 1, modulating volumes on hi-hats. One way you can make the drums on your beats sound more interesting is by changing the level of some of the hits. You might be familiar with doing this on other devices using 16 level mode, where each pad controls a different velocity of the same sound. We don't have that on the Lofi-12 XT, but we can use modulation to achieve a similar effect. Let's start by punching in a hi-hat sequence. I have velocity sensitivity turned off, so all of these triggers are at max volume. The hi-hats fit nicely in the sequence, but let's make the rhythm more compelling by adjusting the levels. The goal here is to have the levels rise and fall to simulate lighter and harder hits of the hi-hat. So from the mod page, press down the D knob and select the amp level option. Some of the steps are being muted by the modulation, so I'm going to bring down the depth to reduce the maximum distance that the volume can travel. Here's how the pattern sounds with and without the modulation on. Next up is adjusting the BPM sync parameters. I want the levels to rise and fall in sync with the rhythm, so I'll test a few rates to see which one sounds best. And lastly, I'll do a final adjustment of the depth and level with the sample chops playing. Use case 2, adding a filter sweep effect with modulation. Another way to add variety to your music is with filter sweeps. This iconic technique adds a wah sound and ducks out whatever sound you have filtered. This works best on tracks that you hear across the entire pattern, like sample chops. It's easy to do this manually by turning the frequency knob of the filter as the pattern plays. You can also automate this action with modulation. First, make sure your track has a filter set. The low-pass filter works well for this kind of sound. Then, from the mod page, use the D knob to select filter frequency as the destination. This is another effect that I typically BPM sync since I want the sweeps to be connected to the rhythm. And I want the filter frequency to go up and down at a more linear rate, so I change the wave shape type to triangle. Lastly, I'll bring the depth down so the filter doesn't have such a large sweep range. You can then enable the filter sweep by turning the filter on and off from the FLT page. Advanced Use Case 1, Modulating panning and delay on vocal samples. A more complex use of modulation is to give sounds a larger presence with panning and delay. This can achieve a similar effect to a stereo delay, like the Kodama effect on the SP404 Mark II. Let's try this out on a vocal sample. I'll start by adding some delay and reverb to the track from the amp page.
In the stillness, whisper shine. In the stillness, whisper shine. Oh, you in the stillness, whisper shine. In the stillness, whisper shine.
Now from the mod page, I'll set the destination of the first LFO to amp pan.
In the stillness, whisper shine.
From here, it's a matter of adjusting the depth and rate to get the sound you're looking for.
Oh, you in the stillness, whisper shine. In the stillness, whisper shine. Oh, you in the stillness, whisper shine. In the stillness, whisper shine. Oh, you in the stillness, whisper shine. In the stillness, whisper shine. Oh, you in the stillness.
Okay, next up is the delay send, which I'll control with LFO2. To access the LFO2 settings, press the left auxiliary button.
Oh, you in the stillness, whisper shine.
Just like before, try experimenting with different rate and depth parameters until it sounds to your liking.
In the stillness, whisper shine. Oh, you in the stillness, whisper shine. In the stillness, whisper shine. Oh, you in the stillness, whisper shine. In the stillness, whisper shine. Oh, you in the stillness.
Alright, let's listen to the sample with the modulation off, then with the modulation enabled.
In the stillness, whisper shine. Oh, you in the stillness, whisper shine. In the stillness, whisper shine. Oh, you in the stillness, whisper shine. In the stillness, whisper shine. Oh, you in the stillness, whisper shine.
Advanced Use Case 2. Creating your own sounds with loop mode and modulation. You can use the Lofi12 XT's loop mode sample playback setting as a lightweight granular synth engine, and modulation lets you adjust these sounds further. Let's try to create a new sound with this vibraphone sample I recorded from my Yamaha keyboard. We'll start by enabling loop mode playback, which you can do by pressing the right auxiliary button from the SND page. Next, I'll tighten up the loop point with the C and D knob. This sounds interesting, kind of like a square or triangle wave. Now that I've got a basic sound, I'm going to add a low-pass filter to reduce the buzzing sound. I find it best to just play around with the parameters until I like the sound. Alright, let's switch to the mod page. The first parameter I'll modulate is the sample start. This can produce very unique sounds with loop mode enabled, but it's also a bit difficult to control. I recommend starting with the depth and rate set below 10 and making small adjustments in those parameters. Here's how it sounds with modulation turned off, and with modulation turned on. Now we'll switch to LFO2. The next parameter I want to control is filter frequency. Just like before, I'll keep these settings low and make small adjustments until I like the sound. The sample is a little quiet, so I'm going to add some overdrive to increase the gain. And lastly, I'll turn velocity sensitivity back on and add some reverb. Alright, let's try adding this to the sequence. The mod page is a powerful tool for adjusting your sounds, but the possibilities can feel daunting. My best advice is to try to approach controls in the modulation page with a clear idea of what you want your sound to do in mind. If you have a goal like adjusting the volume over a set period of time, or changing pitch over time, or filter frequencies, it can help guide what parameters you adjust. In fact, if you can manually adjust the parameters in a way that you like, you can probably automate a modulation of it. Well, that does it for this video. Thanks for watching. See you next time.